Hey everybody, it's Gregg Bendian again here at the ProgCast, and today we have a very interesting musician with a storied career and is someone who has just shown musicality in so many different areas. I'm a fan. I've been following him for years. Most recently, a big fan of his group ProgJect, which you may have heard with Mike Keneally and the boys, playing the classic music of King Crimson, Genesis, Yes, Rush, Pink Floyd, Bill Bruford. It's all over the roadmap of the roots of progressive rock, and an incredible project. He's also played with people like Alice Cooper and Marillion, Satriani, Vai, you name it. I think that's the first place I heard him. My guest is Jonathan Mover. Jonathan, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks. Very happy to be here. I appreciate the nice intro and the interest in speaking to me.
Oh man, you've hit so many interesting areas and areas that we have in common. Uh, we grew up with some of the best radio and the best music and life-changing musical events. Tell me a little bit about growing up in Massachusetts.
Okay. Before we begin, you're freezing quite a bit, and I've got really great high speed. So
It's
just
not it's not freezing here,
it isn't. Okay.
and
Fine.
if that's what's going, I understand if that's what's going to tape, we should be fine.
Yeah. Okay.
That
Cool.
could just be a weird thing. I don't know what that is.
Uh-huh.
Um,
So growing up in Massachusetts, growing up in Massachusetts was great. Where I lived, which was about 20 minutes north of Boston, it was not too far from the ocean on the North Shore, and it was a really nice upbringing. It wasn't too far from the city, so it was easy to get in, but it was suburbs, so it wasn't too crazy. I had a really nice childhood. When I was a kid, Boston was a really fertile area. The Cars and Boston, and of course, having Berklee College of Music and Boston Conservatory and New England Conservatory, all the great musicians, even before they made it really big, like, Steve Smith and Vinnie Colaiuta and Casey Sherrill, Robbie Gonzalez, all these wonderful drummers that were playing around the city when I was a kid. And fortunately, I had a father who was a musician and would actually take me, though I was underage, quite a bit to see Buddy Rich and Louie and my favorite drummers. So it was great. And I had some really wonderful local heroes. We had some, again, because of Berklee and just the scene there. There were some amazing drummers that were playing locally that as a kid I could go out and see, that had, chops and all sorts of elements to their playing, like Cobham and Bruford and everything. Boston really spit out some great players. And as a young kid growing up, there was no shortage of people for me to meet and listen to and be inspired by and sometimes take lessons from. Yeah.
that's a great scene. I remember that when it was happening. And I remember Boston was the place to go. I remember who was from Boston. Sure,
Yeah.
that's a vital scene. And it seems like a lot of people they they just sort of explode in Boston and then they go out into the world like yourself, guys like Vinny, guys like Steve Smith.
Yeah, it's funny because that you mentioned them. Of course, they're both heroes of mine and was certainly inspirational, not only as players, but like you just said, the paths that they took. Um, because of prog rock and hardcore fusion, McLaughlin, Mahavishnu, Beck, all of that stuff, Jean-Luc Ponty, I'm sure we were both into the same things, as well as, Genesis and Gentle Giant in UK. It was by choice and design, but there really wasn't anybody for me to play with when I was growing up. I was in the basement with headphones on every single day. The only times I ever played covers or in a local band was if somebody needed me to sub. Similar to my career as a freelance ghost drummer mostly. So I grew up in a city where Aerosmith in Boston, you had these guys from either high school together or they knew each other and they stayed together and they did the dream that most people strive to do with for themselves. For me though, I liked so many different bands and so many different artists. I never even considered being a band member when I was a kid. I was 14 and 15 thinking to myself, I want to play with Steve Hackett. I want to play with Todd Rundgren. I want to play with Frank Zappa. I want to play with Jaco Pastorius. So I knew that at some point in time, whether or not I chose to go to, further my education after high school and go to university or college, which I considered and looked into, but I knew for sure that I was leaving Peabody, Massachusetts, which is where I'm from. And, Todd Rundgren was not going to call me. I was going to have to go out there and find them, whoever they were going to be. And so that had an awful lot to do with my mindset as a child as well, and learning, so many different styles and practicing to so many different styles and genres of music and drumming styles, so that whoever I met first, I would be capable of playing with them. And therefore, as you know, one thing leads to another. And, you're doing a hard rock gig one day, but your front of house engineer is, doing a fusion gig the next year and calls you, or the bass player that was subbing on the fusion gig is doing a jingle in New York City. And, one thing leads to another. And I never wanted to be typecast or limit myself, to who I could play with and what I could do.
And you were never bored.
That's for sure. I mean, with heroes like Vinny and Simon and, Terry and Tony and Bill and Phil. I mean, we don't even need last names. We know who they all are. Steve, times 5, Dennis, with heroes like that and inspiration from them, sitting in the basement and a massive record collection. That was my thing. I would literally go through every genre, every time signature, every possible drum setup, that I could do when I was a kid, and just try it all. And a lot of times I'm sure you get the same questions from people that interview you, what's your favorite music? What's your favorite style? For me, playing with great musicians is better than playing the style of music. Mm-hmm. I've had some of the greatest experiences doing a jingle for Folgers Coffee with, somebody like Neil Jason on bass and John McCrory on guitar. Is like, wow, this feels so good. And then I played in some big gigs where the musicians weren't so great, and I didn't enjoy the gig as much. That being said, what I'm doing now is absolutely the best of all worlds, because I'm playing my favorite music ever at a time in my life where I've come full circle and am in love with doing it all over again, and playing with some vicious musicians. I mean, you mentioned Mike Keneally before, and having him on stage is such a treat. Rio Okamoto, the keyboard player, is also just insane. Michael Sadler he's Michael Sadler, and he still sounds and sings like he's 20 years old. So
unbelievable.
I'm in a great position right now and really happy to be here.
We should talk about it. I mean, I can tell people, being a person who spent a considerable amount of time delving into repertoire from the last 50 years. So I did the Mahavishnu Project, and then from the Mahavishnu Project, I ended up doing a few years with the Musical Box. And I believe in this idea, and Jonathan and I were talking about this before we went on to record, but that the people who originated this music are not going to perform it necessarily any longer. So it leaves the question, does that mean the music doesn't get played live? And I'm a person that thinks that music really is a different experience when you listen to it live than when you listen to a recording. You can listen to it. It could be the same recording over and over and over again. I'm a person who wants to hear different versions of things. And I also like to hear other people play music that they didn't write, but treat it like it's a form of classical music, or that it's just a form of, I like the word repertoire, and then do it to a T. If you play the notes and put them all in the right place, the piece will play itself.
Mhm.
And this is music that was put together by guys like Tony Banks and Dave Stewart and Bill Bruford and Geddy Lee. And you're talking about some of the great composing minds. So in a way, having the right singer and having the guys that can play the parts, that's most of the battle, because the music plays itself if you play it right. Right, Jonathan?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because again, I remember seeing you many years ago, too many years ago. And I don't say that, to boast our ages. I just think it's been too long. But I remember seeing you do the Mahavishnu Project, which was phenomenal. And what for me, it's an interesting place to be because I have to be perfectly honest and say I never got the tribute band, but I don't aim that towards you doing Mahavishnu because Mahavishnu is very different. But I've seen the Pink Floyd tributes and the Van Halen tributes and some of the Rush tributes, and I didn't quite get it because why would I go see a Rush tribute when I could still go see Rush? And on top of that, those particular bands, they look like them and act like them and play the same exact gear, and they play as much of the same notes as they can play. So this whole thing for ProgJect came about, and I didn't know that you had played with the musical box, but I got a last minute call to fill in for them. And I've told the story plenty of times, so you probably read it or heard it already, but literally it was a cold call on a Tuesday evening. I just flew back to LA through terrible weather from Boston, where I was visiting my mother. And I got back Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. and I was catching up throughout the day. And I get a text message asking if I'm available and interested. And if so, they would put me in touch with, or they would put the band in touch with me, Sebastian, who runs the band. So I said, yeah, give him my info. About an hour later, Sebastian calls me up, and lovely guy, and wow, this is going to be such an honor to play with you. We've all seen you play, in GTR, Marillion, Satriani. And I said, yeah, sounds good. I know what you guys do. Send me your itinerary and the set list, and we'll figure it out. He said, it doesn't matter. Tomorrow's the first gig. So I literally got on a 6 a.m. flight Wednesday morning, flew back across the country in horrendous weather. And then they picked me up in Boston, drove me up to New Hampshire, and we did our first gig with no rehearsals. So here's where it gets interesting. Number one, 15 seconds into it, I was in love all over again, feeling 14 or 15, like I was in my basement, practicing to, seconds out and Trick of the Tail and Selling England and the Lamb. So right away, I was in heaven. And then I realized, wow, there's an audience for this. This is incredible, And of course, like you playing with them, they had Phil Collins' identical drum kit for the 73 tour or something, set up right-handed, of course, for me. So I literally just flew across the country with sticks. And so we got through the first gig, 3-hour set, and they had some medleys, which we talked about at sound check, but no rehearsal. And then the second gig next night, and everything was really great. I was having a ball. And then on the third or fourth day, we were driving from one gig to the next, and the guys were all really lovely. And Sebastian, says to me in the car, in the van, do you mind if we talk about, some of the songs? I said, no, of course. And he said, and I'm just paraphrasing, in Firth of Fifth, when it goes into that, second section of blah, 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 the sixth measure, Phil does the drum fill where it goes from the floor tom to the rack tom. And, we heard the original masters, so we know exactly what he did. And, you're doing something else there. And at first I thought maybe he was kind of joking. And a buddy that he said, can you listen to the original? I have it here on my iPhone, and, do that fill. And so, I listened to it, and my head was already filled, with a million notes. I mean, you played with them, you know what they're doing. And I didn't get a chance to rehearse. So my goal was just get them through every gig. So now that I'm getting through every gig, they're starting to nitpick.
Oh yeah.
After a couple of days, I finally had to just say, look, man, I understand what you're doing, but I'm not in a place to do that because, not that I don't want to, but right now my head is full and you're throwing new songs each night anyway. So it's not even the same set that I can get comfortable with. But I have to be honest, Phil Collins is really one of my gods of Mount Olympus. But I'm much more familiar with Seconds Out because that was the double record that I played to for so many years. And even though, Chester's on 99% of it and Bill plays a song or two, I'm thinking Chester's parts. I'm not thinking these studio tracks. And so that was kind of a defining moment for me because I wasn't thinking about doing my own gig yet, but that was like the first little subtle hint of me not being able to enjoy the gig like I was for the prior 3 or 4 days, and so anyway, I played with them. I really did have a great time. Their drummer had a problem getting his visa to come into the States or whatever, but they sorted that out 2 or 3 weeks in, and I went back to LA and all was fine. But when I got back to LA, I was really bummed out. I hadn't had that much fun in a long time. And I'm sure you can relate to this playing with them and also doing Mahavishnu. I've had a wonderful, blessed career. I mean, no complaints with the people I've played with, the ones that you mentioned before and many others. But there've been very, very few gigs I've had where you had to wipe the smile off my face if you could. And 90% of my career has not been, like that. I love playing with Alice Cooper, but I'm not in my glory and element when I'm playing with him, but I'm very happy to be there, So playing Genesis and that era of Genesis, I fell in love all over again. So when I got back to LA, I really said to myself, how can I do this for myself? There's a market out there, there's money to be made, there's an audience that's rabid for this stuff, and I want to do it. There has to be other people, but I don't want to be a tribute band. And I don't want to just play one band because there's plenty of bands out there doing that. So that's when I thought about ProgJect being an homage to the genre of prog, and then trying to find people that are somehow related to prog to play it with me, but at a very high level of musicianship. Because no disrespect to a lot of the tribute bands out there, most of them, I think, put on an amazing show visually. But I've yet to see anybody really blow my mind musically. And I know that you can relate to that because I know the type of drummer you are. You're at a high level of playing and you surround yourself by those people. So I really wanted to put something out that wasn't based on the visuals, but was based on the musicality, the musicianship. And that's when I started making the phone calls and getting the connections to these people.
Yeah, you're so right. If it's not about the music first, I'm not on board. So it's like it's got the music, and then you figure out how it's going to look. And a funny story for you on that is when we started Mahavishnu Project in 2001, people were saying, "Why doesn't your guitarist have a double neck?"
Right. Yeah.
Why aren't you guys wearing white? And it's like, if I had a guitar,
put a carnation in your headstock.
Yeah, like let's go for it if you're going to go for it. No, but that was an uphill battle for a minute until we got John McLaughlin's go ahead and his compliments, and people then, because that was a big question too. Is John McLaughlin okay with what you guys are doing?
Right.
Yes, he actually, here's what he said. And then Jan Hammer hired us to be his band for Moogfest. So the idea of again specializing in this kind of music, where I know I've played Can Utility and the Coastliners, right? And one of the things that is interesting to me about that is if you play Phil's part exactly the way he plays it, it's fucking perfection. And even the Mellotron solo, like I wrote it out. I wrote out what he played. And when I was starting, like Apocalypse, the original Apocalypse, I wrote out his part. And even like the fact that the band would ask me, is that hi-hat foot or hi-hat stick?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
on Battle of Epping Forest,
Yeah.
Phil's doing some really subtle shit. And if you don't have ISO tracks,
Yeah.
you're not transcribing the thing, then you're not really seeing how three-dimensional his playing is. And some of the recent Nick Davis mixes have been so wonderful and revelatory in the Genesis catalog to hear what Phil's doing in all of its glory. What a touch,
Yeah.
what a feel.
Oh,
Let's talk about
incredible.
Phil for a minute,
Yeah.
Jonathan, because I
One of
think
a kind.
he's underrated, isn't he?
I mean, not to us, because we know how fucking amazing he is. But in the world of a lot of drummers and in the world in general who just know Phil as a pop star, they're missing the boat. Phil is, I mean, Prog has some of the greatest drummers out there. They really do. And in the popular prog, and I mean that just by the bands that we all know, because there's also some amazing prog that didn't really get very big, or not as big as they should have been. But Phil, he's the man. He's got the groove, he's got the chops, but he's also got the ideas.
The musicality.
Yeah. And the stuff that he played, I mean, Return of the Giant Hogweed, Get 'Em Up by Friday, even way back in the beginning, the man was a single kick monster with, I mean, we're on the same page there. I love Phil Collins. Bruford, who doesn't have the type of groove that Phil has, but he definitely has, the mechanical aspects of it. And he's such a clever drummer, as clever as he is a person. And you know how clever Bill is. Barrymore Barlow, absolutely. I mean, a force to be reckoned with, so.
If not Phil, Clive Bunker for a minute, because,
yeah, and Clive too. What is that?
You've seen the Hillage thing he did, right?
Yeah.
It's killer.
I know. I'm forgetting the name of that track on the first Jethro Tull record where Clive does the drum soloing. A beast, But I mean, Barrymore, he broke all the molds as far as everybody that played with Tull, especially. Nobody comes close with the chops and the ideas that Barry had. But Phil's the king of prog for me. He really is. And he never lost it. I mean, unfortunately, with these surgeries and everything, that's a different story. But even on the pop records like Abacab, that 3-note sticking of the toms to the kick drum, it's not a triplet, the and put another record on. Mm-hmm. I'm like, nobody can play that. Nobody has that pocket to put those notes in that place,
You got me going though. So I gotta say, listening to the album Genesis, which has Silver Rainbow on it.
Yeah, with the yellow. Yes. Oh yeah.
The drumming on that.
Yeah, and he's
gonna get better. Dun,
right.
dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
I mean,
of course. We're both getting excited. I mean, not only that, and of course we know about Brand X and a lot of the popular stuff, but when I'm into a drummer and really into a drummer like Phil, like Simon Phillips, Vinnie Colaiuta, Dave Maddox, Andy Newmark, Gad, Murata, I buy everything they play on. Picaro, even if it's a horrible record, I'll buy it for the drumming. Phil, as a session drummer back in the early and middle 70s, man, he's on some records that nobody knows about where he is just unbeatable. Are you familiar with the stuff that he did with John Martin?
With John Martin.
Yeah. So there's that one song, which anybody that listens to this, and if you don't know it, you got to check it out, and then you're going to call me. And even the guys in Musical Box that are Phil crazy did not know about this song. Some People Are Crazy by John Martin on the Grace and Danger record. I think it's Grace and Danger. Unbelievable. It is this slow, funky, fatback ballad with the most insane groove and big, giant concert tom drum fills. I mean, oh my God. And yeah, he's the shit. Phil is it. And, I never got the opportunity to really properly interview him, for the magazine. I got a moment on the first big, comeback tour, which was 2007. Yeah. So he was kind enough to say yes. And they gave me, I think they said you can have 45 minutes with Chester and 15 minutes with Phil. So, I've known Chester for many, many years, and I'm a huge Chester fan too, and Zappa and Weather Report. The
He's been on
solo,
this program too, so love
uh,
Chester. Yeah.
yeah, I mean that the solo record he did with Tony Banks,
Hmm.
A Curious Feeling, I think it's called.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So anyway, I sit with Chester for 45 minutes. We have a great interview, and then the rep knocks on the door. Okay, Phil's ready. Phil comes in, and I'm dying. I'm containing myself because I really am gaga over meeting Phil for the first time.
Of course.
And we start talking, and he realizes how into him I am, and also how the drummer that I am because of the questions I'm asking. And so 15 minutes go by, and they knock, and he says, we're okay. We'll go a little bit longer. So I got about 40 minutes with him.
Nice.
And I said, I really appreciate this, but what I really want to do is spend a few hours with you and do this thing that I do called face to face, where we can go through, particular songs that you've played from your career, a bit of Genesis, Brand X, John Martin, William Lyle, all of these people that nobody knows about, and dig in. And he promised me that we would do it. And he gave me his address and his email, and I would email him and bother him once or twice a year. He would always write back to me like within an hour, and it just never really happened. But yeah, it's okay. He was great for the 40 minutes that I had with him. But I couldn't agree with you more. He is absolutely one of the rhythm gods of Mount Olympus.
Oh yeah, and then just happens to be a good singer.
Yeah, oh yeah, and songwriter, producer. I mean, unbelievable.
Right?
Yeah.
Changes pop music history, but he starts out as the quiet and unassuming drummer in the back with the four-piece kit,
Right.
Like, what the
Right.
fuck?
Yep.
Yeah.
Unreal.
And so I mean there's so many drummers we could talk about. I'm kind of interested in some other little areas, and I'm sure we'll come back to drummers, but GTR
Mhm.
and you going to London, I find that interesting. What prompted you to say I'm gonna pick up and I'm gonna go live in London and see what happens?
So after high school was when I, really thought hard. Do I want to go to a music school and continue studying, or do I want to go out there? And I didn't really pick up drums and start playing until about 13 and a half years old. So I was playing professionally, meaning making money, in my junior and senior years of high school. So I'd only been playing, maybe a year and a half, and I was out there gigging a little bit here and there. I had a really great gig right in high school, my senior year, which was a prog crazy. It was called ITMB. It stood for the Incredible Two-Man Band. And it was just a keyboard player who also sang lead, played bass pedals, and also played trumpet, who had an outfit like Emerson with, I think he had something like 12 keys around him, 3 sides of keyboards. And then the drummers that played with him in Boston were the known drummers that played the big giant drum kits with concert toms and gongs and timpani and everything. So I got the gig playing with him when I was like 16 and a half years old, started making some decent money and started playing to some big, big gigs. Anyway, so I had a taste of it and I was really hungry, but I also wanted to study. And in 79, when Joe's Garage came out and I got turned on to Vinny, my life changed in a rhythmic sense. All of a sudden I was hearing things that didn't make sense but made sense, what he was playing on those 3 records. And when some information finally came out on Vinny, the first thing I ever, other than seeing his name on the record, the first thing I ever saw about Vinny was in the little black Zildjian artist book that they put out. And it showed a picture of Vinny with glasses and the mustache. And it had a little, column in there that he played with Frank and a few other people, and that he went to Berkeley and he studied with Gary Chaffee. And he specifically credited Chafe for the polyrhythms and all that.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I got to go down the same path. So I actually went to Berkeley. Unfortunately, when I got to Berkeley, Gary had already left Berkeley and I didn't know it. And he was teaching locally. I stayed at Berkeley for a little bit, but I didn't have a great experience. And I'm sure part of that I'll take responsibility for, because I was going there for something that I didn't get. So I didn't have I didn't have a very open,
Yeah.
idea, about it. And then, I just had a few bad experiences there that, just really turned me off. In the meantime, I had found Chafee's number, and I auditioned for him, and I started studying with him. So I studied with him for about 6 months, and then I found out about PIT, and out in, Percussion Institute, Musicians Institute in LA.
Mhm.
And so I'm now, 17 and a half or 18. And I said, I want to check this out, because in their catalog, 3 guys were listed that I, thought of, if I can study with these guys: Peter Erskine, Casey Sherrill, Ralph Humphrey. I was like, are you kidding me? Okay, forget Berkeley. This is where I'm going. So I sent in my audition tape, and I got accepted, and I flew out to California to start school. And I showed up about a week before, and they were kind enough to, let me in and put me in a practice room. And so I was in the practice room one day for 3 or 4 hours, playing all the Chafee stuff, the polyrhythms, the stickings, and the linear, all the patterns and everything. And I'm soaking wet, and I open the door to come out, and there's about 10 guys in the hallway. And they all said, oh man, can we sign up to study with you in the next semester? Well, who are you? And I said, I'm a student, I want to study with Peter and Casey and Ralph. And one of the guys said, oh, they don't teach here. So I went to the office, and make a long story short, I said, what's the deal? The brochure that you sent out, the money that I paid. And they said, oh, well, they're just visiting faculty. We can't guarantee. I said, your brochure says that there are teachers here. And they kind of gave me a little bit of lip. So, I called my folks. My mother got on the phone with them the next day and said, not only are you refunding everything that we paid you, you're also going to refund us for the amount of money we spent sending my son out to California, the apartment that he just took for 6 months, and you're flying him home, or else you'll hear from a lawyer. And so that was the end of PIT at the time. I came back to Boston, talked to Chafee, studied a little bit more, but it was time for me to go. So anyway, to answer your question, I went to London because I had been to New York. I played there with ITMB in high school, and I'd been a few times. I'd been to California. I went to LA. Right then, it wasn't a great experience. And most of my life and my love of music was English, from the Beatles to ELP, Genesis UK, Crimson, Pink Floyd, Gentle Giant UK, Peter Gabriel, you name it, all right down the line of Joan Armatrading, Pete Townsend and the Who, with exception to Frank Zappa and Todd, and maybe a handful of other bands. It was all English rock. So I just thought, I'm going to take a trip over to London. I bought a round trip ticket, which back then you could stay for 6 months. Now it's like 6 weeks or something, but back then you could go for 6 months. I had, I think, $500 in my pocket, and I said, I'm going to see what happens. And I got there, and I got the cheapest room that I could find. I don't even know if they have them anymore, but it was literally a room a little bit bigger than the bathroom, with a sink and a toilet and a cot right in the room. And, it was, I look back now as the romantic days of living on, French fries and tomato soup and stuff like that, just so I could survive.
Sure.
And I hustled. I made phone calls. I talked to people, even though I didn't drink even a beer back then. I went to pubs to see music and to talk to meet musicians, and I made phone calls, and one thing led to another. And it wasn't immediate. I had a few gigs beforehand, but I ended up in GTR a year or two later, after playing with a bunch of different people and the word getting out, and it came around full circle to me first playing with Steve Hackett, and then Hackett hired me to do a European tour, which he had booked, which would have been in, I think, the spring of or the fall of '85, something like that, summer, fall of '85, spring, whatever. And then we were going to do a record with his solo band. And after 2 or 3 weeks and a few things happening, he called me up one day and he said, I have good news and bad news. And I'd heard this before a few times in my career. I said, okay, give me the bad news first. He said, the tour is not happening and I'm disbanding the solo project, for the time being. And I said, oh, really? And what's the good news? I just met Steve Howe and we're going to do a guitar-based supergroup and we'd like you to play drums. And like a week later, the three of us were in a rehearsal studio, throwing riffs around, mostly them and a little bit with me. And then from there, we started auditioning bass players. And I don't remember if we auditioned singers or not. I think Steve Hackett had the direct connection to the singer, Max, and just brought him in and he ended up with us. And that's how it came about. But I went to London because of my love of English rock and my love of mostly English drummers at the time. Simon Phillips and John Bonham, of course, and Bill and Phil and Barry Moore and John Weathers from Gentle Giant was a big influence on me too. Sure. So there's no shortage of monsters over there. And that was my reason for going.
So tell me about the live band GTR. Did you guys do shows a lot, and what was the material and what was the experience like? Because it's like two super strong voices on guitar.
Yeah, the GTR experience was an incredibly positive one for me, but with a lot of negativity that I turned into a positive. So when we first got together, the three of us, the stuff that we were writing and throwing around was pretty heavy prog, lots of odd time. And when the initial 5 of us were together, our music in general was more on the playing side. It wasn't a pop band by any stretch. So, and the two Steves got along really well, and it was a great gig. I was really happy with the direction we were going while we were writing and rehearsing and demoing. Then it came time to sign a record deal. And without going through too much and wasting too much time, the powers that be decided on Jeffrey Downes as the producer. And Jeff Downes was chosen mostly for business reasons, I found out later on, because he was in partnership with some of the people that were calling the shots. But also he had convinced people, or so I heard at the time, that he could do what Trevor Horn did because he was 50% of the Buggles and, they were equal. Okay, famous last words. So Trevor Horn is one of the genius producers, engineers, musicians ever, and love what he's done and continues to do. Jeff was a huge disappointment. The two things that I think were wrong, because he had the power that he had, was he tried to turn GTR into a pop band so that he could do what Asia had done, sell 7 million records, and what Trevor Horn had done with 90120 and stuff like that. And of course, Peter Gabriel had the So record out at the same time that we were doing all this. And so he changed and rearranged and really chopped and sliced and diced a lot of the great stuff that we had been playing down to more simple tunes and everything. And it didn't go over really well in the studio with everybody, but because he had an alliance with Steve Howe, and I think he still kind of looked up to Steve Howe because of his association with Yes and everything, he sided more with Howe, and Hackett was kind of pushed out a little bit and pushed off to the side. I would say a month into the recording of the record, which I believe was 9 months recording that thing, Steve and Steve pretty much stopped talking. By the time we got on tour, they didn't travel together. They didn't speak. Steve Howe had his own tour manager. Steve Hackett had his own tour manager. Steve Howe traveled separately. Most of the time, they didn't stay in the same hotel. If they did, they were like on separate floors. If you ever see any live footage of GTR, they don't look at each other on stage. They don't really act together on anything. So it was a drag for me because I wasn't just in it to play the music and be a rock star, whatever. I was in it to be with everybody and have fun and be this great, happy family, to experience, everything at 20, 21 years old. So it was a drag. I'll tell you a funny story.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to thank Hackett for this, because GTR was a wonderful launch for me internationally. I had played some records and tours before, but GTR was a massive MTV, with a million-selling record, and we toured America, Canada, and Europe. But going back to that, so myself and Phil Spalding, the bass player, we were done in the first 3 or 4 days in the studio. All drum tracks were done, bass tracks were done, and I had a bit of percussion to overdub. And then it was the two Steves with Jeffrey and doing vocals. And they were taking forever. I mean, it was very slow going. And a lot of the record is synclavier.
Uh-huh.
It's not even the instruments you think. I got my cat here. So anyway, I was finding, for the first month or two, I hung out. I watched everything the engineer was doing, because I also wanted to get my, my studio chops together and learn about miking and running the machines and everything. And after a couple of months, I was bored, stiff, and I had to get out of there. So my girlfriend and I at the time, we went over to Switzerland, and we went through the Alps and took a little vacation. And I came back like maybe a month later or something, and they had destroyed my drum tracks. They had replaced 2 of my drum tracks with synclavier drums, and I hated the program that they were doing. They had edited and cut out some of the bigger drum fills and some of the double bass, and they had chopped up some of the songs that had progressive, epic little moments in it. And I was in the studio listening to them, and I had a meltdown. And I told Jeff Downes and Steve Howe that that their ears were stuffed so far up their asses and that they could go fuck themselves. And I quit the band, and I walked out of Townhouse Studios, 21 years old, telling Steve Howe to go fuck himself. And I quit a supergroup that was about to be launched. I was so distraught over what they did to my drums and the record. Steve Hackett came running out after me, and he begged me to reconsider. And he just said, "You're making a huge mistake. I'm not happy with what's happening either, but this is going to be a stepping stone for both of us. I urge you to like calm down and hang in there, and you'll thank me later," type of thing. And I did. I came back in. I did not apologize to Steve or Jeffrey, but I stayed in the band, and it was exactly what Hackett said. It was a launching pad. The tour was a successful tour, but it wasn't a happy tour because of the 2 of them and the vibe that was happening. We finished 86. We finished the US, Canada, England, and Europe. Very successful run. And then we took a little break, and we were all supposed to reconvene at Steve Howe's farmhouse in Devon to start writing the second record. And my gut told me, and it was right, that Hackett wasn't going to show up. So, we're out there, and we start writing and everything, and a couple of days go by, and Hackett calls up and says, "I'm not coming in, and I'm not coming back." And, that was that. The material that we were writing without Hackett was right back to some cool progressive stuff. And we did 4 tunes that we demoed at the time. And I was very happy with the direction that we were going in again. Jeff Downes wasn't there, and it was just the 4 of us, me, Howe, Phil, and Max. And so we wrote a bunch of tunes and everything. But I wasn't really into it because Steve wasn't there. Steve Hackett wasn't there. So we took a break, and at that point, I just said, I'm not coming back either. So the short story to the end of this is, they ended up getting, at first, Robert Berry to replace Hackett, and they got another drummer that came in, and they did an entire record that when Arista heard it, they shelved it and dropped the band, and that was the end of GTR. But I think Jeff Downes took that material and once again, like synclaviated it and did a bunch of things to it and put together his version of GTR with a little bit of everything, and then ended up, putting it out on a tiny label with some strange name, and it sold, 1,000 CDs, and that was kind of the end of it. So that's the whole GTR story, unfortunately. But I can tell you that the original tunes that we went in and recorded at Townhouse was the prog that you were hoping to get out of that band. And the last thing I wanted to do, and I'll finish it by saying this: when I heard about Asia, I literally thought the saviors of prog, are here. Okay, ELP, yes, King Crimson, all on one record. Are you kidding me? So I got an import of that record before it came to America. We used to have a place in Massachusetts called Rocket Records, which was all the imports. And my guy at Rocket Records, I told him about this band Asia, and he got me the LP before it came out. And I rushed home and I put the record on and I put the needle down and I listened for about 10 seconds and I picked the needle up and I put it down, up and down. And I think I listened to the Asia record once and I never listened to it again. It was the biggest disappointment. I'm not going to say it was bad music, but it was not what I was expecting. So when we first got GTR together, Steve Howe was still in the mindset that we could have a successful band, but we could be playing. Mm-hmm. And again, whether it was Jeff Downes or us signing to Arista when we had the opportunity to sign with Geffen and we didn't, and one thing led to another, and it just turned out to be a bad pop record as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I remember feeling that way about Asia, and I remember feeling that way about the GTR record, because obviously fans of those guys, and the biggest fans. So another part of your career that's interesting to me is that you were involved in the Russian music scene.
Yeah. That was one of the most exciting times for good and bad reasons. Basically, again, my stories can go on for ages. In 1989, after a couple of years now playing with Satriani, I had met Satriani playing with him and Steve Vai at the Summer NAMM show in Chicago in '87. And then I was still living in London, but I continued playing with Joe because it took off and he invited me along. And then in '89, after we had done some of the initial recording for Flying in a Blue Dream, Joe's father took ill. And so he shut everything down for a while and we weren't sure when it was going to pick up again. So I was living in New York City now. I moved to New York and I went to see The Who. Simon invited me, since I became a professional drummer, Simon became a dear friend of mine and not just my hero. And so Simon was playing with The Who at Giant Stadium. And I went to the show. Jody Lynn Scott was playing with The who, aside from being an unbelievable percussionist, is drop dead gorgeous. I couldn't wait to meet her. So I went backstage after the show, and in talking to Jody, she said, you should meet a friend of mine. His name is Blondie Chaplin. I didn't know who he was. You may know who he is now, but I just played on a record of his. He has a South African band, and they're going to do one of the first biggest tours of the Soviet Union, but they're having drummer problems. So Blondie was backstage. I met Blondie, and he said, yeah, Anton Fig is my drummer, but we're supposed to go to the Soviet Union for 7 weeks, and Anton can't leave the Letterman show. We've been auditioning drummers, and nobody can play these African type of pop, funk, fatback grooves of 4 and 6, how they kind of go back and forth between 4 and 6. And I love the music of Soweto. It's some of my favorite music. And he said, we have to make a decision in like the next 2 or 3 days because we're supposed to leave for Moscow in a week and we might cancel the tour. Funny story. 2 days later, I knew Anton. 2 days later, I was playing a blues gig at the bitter end with a horrific band. And the only reason I was playing it was I had just moved to New York and they offered me a little bit of money and I was filling in for somebody doing a favor, but the band was terrible. And Blondie heard that I was playing and said, oh, well, we'll come see you Sunday night. And I really didn't want them to come. I was embarrassed. Blondie, the bass player, and Anton came to the gig, and it was horrific. It was absolutely horrible. I mean, I am not like Gad or Vinny or Simon or anybody that, even if they're playing with lousy musicians or musicians below them, they are still awesome. I suck when I'm not playing with a good bass player or a great rhythm guitar player. I'll tell you right now, I don't have it. This was a terrible band. Blondie looked at Anton and said, this guy sucks, you know? And Anton said, trust me, he can play, give him a chance, you know, play with him in a rehearsal room. This is a bad gig, and I know that Jonathan can do the gig for you. So fortunately, they offered me the opportunity to play. We got together a couple days later. They gave me the gig. The next week, I was on a flight to Moscow learning the set. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life to go to the Soviet Union in the late 80s before the curtain opened up, and it was KGB and everything, you know, like you hear about. Anyway, 7 weeks turned into 3 months. We toured all over the Soviet Union, some of the Baltics, Ukraine, Russia, Georgia, Armenia, you know, all over the place. And we were playing to some shows that were 20, 30, 40,000 people because they had never seen, you know, foreign bands before. You know, when Elton John played there and Paul McCartney played there and Michael Jackson, they only did like Moscow or Leningrad or Kiev. They didn't do a real tour. We were doing a double bill with Susie Quattro. You remember her? And Susie, who's awesome, I love her, was a huge rock star in the Soviet Union. You know, it's one of those things where nobody in America knows Johnny Hallyday, but you go to France and Johnny Hallyday can sell out Bercy for 30 days. Susie Quattro is like the Bruce Springsteen of New Jersey. Susie Quattro is in Russia.
Wow.
So we were out with her and her band, opening up for them, but we were playing this amazing, you know, South African pop, rock, funk. You remember before I said you couldn't wipe a smile off my face on a few gigs? Other than ProgJect, playing with Scully, which was what they were called, and playing with Aretha Franklin, I have never been so happy in my life. So I spent 3 months with them. While I was there, with about 30 people, 4 of us from New York, or 3 of us from New York, and about 20 or so from England with Susie, big entourage, I was the only person that enjoyed the tour. Now, maybe that's because of my distant grandparents' Ukrainian, Russian, Austrian, Polish background, and my DNA is everybody hated it. And you know, you hear the stories about toilet paper that's like sandpaper. They're true.
Yeah, I know.
You hear the story about, you know, you drink the water and you run to the bathroom and you throw up. That was going on there. So we had to be careful and adjust, but I'm the only one that adjusted. Everybody could not wait to go home after 1 week. And when we heard the tour was extended from 7 weeks to 12 weeks, I was over the moon. I was the only one that made friends there. And I ended up making friends with a few producers and musicians that were connected, you might say, to the government. And I got a visa in 1989 that allowed me to travel back and forth to the Soviet Union whenever I wanted to, which you really couldn't get. So I was very lucky, and I did a bunch of concerts. I produced over there. I drummed on a bunch of different records. And after about a year and a half of going back and forth, one of the main guys that I was working with all the time said, you know, we should just get you an apartment here and come over and spend as much time as possible. As long as you're here, we'll keep throwing you work. So I got an apartment in Moscow, and I spent a lot of time over there for about 5 years, split up between New York, Moscow, and then coming back to tour with Joe, with Alice Cooper, and then go back over there for months and months at a time. And that's what happened, you know, until the curtain opened up. And then around 94, I think, I was there for the second revolution in, I believe, April of 92. I was in Red Square. when that went down with the army and Yeltsin and, the turrets pointing at everybody and machine guns, and it was pretty heavy, but I wasn't going to miss it. But when all that went down and it became a bit of the Wild West with, the mafia taking over and big money and the ruble being, devalued, so much that I witnessed some really bad things in '94 with people getting killed and stuff like that. And the people that I thought were my brothers that I had spent 4 or 5 years working with and staying with and traveling with, they had literally no emotions and no feelings and nothing to say, seeing people killed or somebody laying dead in the street. And I just couldn't take it one night with something that I saw and witnessed, and seeing that they had no compassion, no emotion. I just said, I'm going home tomorrow, and I never went back.
I guess it's a survival mechanism, eh?
Yes, and it's funny you say that, because when I was there with Scully and a few, time trips after, I met some amazing people, men and women, and they were the greatest people when I was there with them. When they got out, if they got out and they came to New York, they turned into the nastiest, backstabbing, dog-eat-dog people I've ever met. And it's exactly what you just said. It was survival mode. The minute they had the opportunity to screw you over because of the wonderful life you had in America, boy, did they do it. And, I lost a few friends that way, but hey, live and learn. But my time there, especially the tour with Scully, it was unprecedented, and nothing comes close to what we did. That was amazing.
It's an amazing part of the world, and my people are from Armenia, Turkey, and Poland,
Right, of course. Yeah.
and through Russia.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, like maybe there's something about that where you do feel very simpatico with people like that.
Yeah, yeah, and it was immediate. Of course, there were discomforts, no doubt about it, but I really felt very at home and very happy to be there. And you couldn't stop me from exploring. We would get to a new city, whether it was Yerevan or Leninaki or Tbilisi, and everybody would go to the hotel and bitch and complain about, how the standard was so low there. And I would grab my little, shoulder bag and start walking the city and meeting people and talking to people. And and again, it was KGB time, so you walk down the street and somebody behind the corner of a building would be like, because they didn't want to be seen talking to you. If they were seen talking to you, the KGB would grab them, take their papers, bring them into whatever office. What were you doing talking to an American? Did they tell you something? And it was crazy, but it was amazing. Can we take 2 seconds so I can
Sure, man. Let's pause.
Okay, I'll be right.
So I did want to talk to you about how you chose the program that you chose for ProgJect, because you played all of my favorites. You played, I think, just incredible amounts of the classic stuff. If you had to choose one ELP epic to play, Carnival 9 Impression 1. I mean, it's all there. It's interesting to me, like also hearing it played the way you played it, which was just, I mean, Keneally probably a better guitarist than Greg Lake. So like just this ability to upgrade certain parts of that composition, but the composition itself stands there. And Carnival 9, and in particular, the recapitulation of idea after idea after idea. I'm standing there as an ELP fanatic.
Yeah, me too.
From 10, 11 years old. Brain Salad, when it came out, I was probably 10. I got it when it came out. So, that experience of hearing it nailed and beautifully sung, and just the rhythm section being so tight, and just all the transitions, and what I'm telling you what it takes to play Impression 1, but that idea of how you chose things. Tell me about that.
It's really simple, to be honest with you. Before I even called any guys, and I had the name ProgJect, and I had the idea of what it was going to be, and I literally jumped on the computer with a spreadsheet, put the names of the bands, and then the songs that I'd want to play, strictly from what I grew up loving and practicing in the basement. And, what I thought would encompass, I look at ProgJect as the homage to, to the genre of prog, but it's based on the four main prog bands for me, which are Genesis, King Crimson, Yes, and ELP. Not in that order, but, those are the four. And then we do some Pink Floyd and some Rush and UK and Gentle Giant, Peter Gabriel, Tull, and all of that. But those main four. And so it was easy, like you said, with ELP. That's the tune, part one and part two, that just encapsulates everything that, ELP is all about.
I love Second Impression. People should talk more about Second Impression and Emerson's playing on that.
Oh, man. I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, just like with Phil Collins. But I also had to think about what is, A, going to translate best to the audience, and B, it's a funny, I wouldn't say it's a fine line, but you saw the show. Even though we're doing so many songs that have vocals in them, half the night is instrumental. So, would I love to play, the Second Impression, the jazzy bits? Absolutely. Would I love to play something like some of the parts of Tarkus and everything? But it's all instrumental. Yeah. So, Carnival 9, First Impression 1 and 2 was a given. And then, of course, Firth of Fifth and Cinema Show, Dance on a Volcano, not only would I have gone to them anyway, but I had just played them with the musical box. So I was on fire to play them again. And I love those songs.
Those are great.
The Siberian Control, to me, it's the first song I ever played start to finish on a drum kit when I was 13 and a half years old, so that I just love the song. There were definitely other Yes songs that I wanted to, check out, but we also incorporated some of that stuff in the medleys that we played. And I actually preferred and wanted to do long distance runaround instead of roundabout, but I also thought, we're just establishing ourselves. We really should also, cater to the audience as well. And then as we go along, we'll learn more and more material and do different versions. And as far as Crimson goes, anything with Bruford and Crimson, whether it was the early stuff like Red and Larks and Starless, or, the quartet that came out later on. But we were focusing on the early stuff. So that's when I put together that medley of Larks Part 1 into Red Nightmare with all the drum fills, into Larks Part 2. And then, of course, you have to do Schizoid Man. Again, Schizoid Man to Crimson is roundabout to Yes. And it at least kind of establishes ourselves with an audience that, although I hope they're going to recognize a lot of what we're doing, they'll definitely recognize those. And the other stuff was really just songs that I loved that I thought, again, the Pink Floyd medley, you can't go wrong with Wish You Were Here, Money and Have a Cigar. We are doing some earlier Gentle Giant that we're working on now.
Oh, really?
But we did 2 weeks in Spain because it's just one of those songs that's just such a fun tune. Oh, yeah. And when I first heard it on the Missing Piece record, that was the song that jumped out to me that I played the most. And Living in the Past, just because it's in 5 and the way we arranged it is never been done before. That's my own arrangement that I put together in Pro Tools, and the parts that we're all playing, are pretty complicated, even though it's kind of a simple arrangement. The parts that everybody are playing are really pretty deep. So, it was a combination of what do we want to express and why do we want to express it. But the song choices were easy because it's just all stuff that I love and wanted to play since I was a kid. There were other things that we had on the list, like, for example, doing UK. The obvious choice was Presto Vivace, but of course now you're talking another instrumental. So I was thinking In the Dead of Night. So when I mentioned UK, Rio was the one who said, "Oh, can we do Rendezvous 602 because it's my favorite piano piece?" And that's when Michael said, "Oh, and it's my favorite song too because I used to see Wetton do it when he opened up the Saga." So there were some things that the guys gave input on, but most everything literally was my idea, and I just said, hey guys, this is the set list I'm thinking of. And they all got back to me and said, great, there's nothing we want to change here. And we'll do more and more down the road. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a perfect set list. You've chosen the classics, but also I think the medley concept and the transitions really knocked me out. Showing the relationship between things like Hell's Bells and Age of Information or Land's End and some of that instrumental stuff. I think in order for it to be fully prog, it does have to have a lot of instrumentals, and that's it.
It does. And, it's funny because looking back now, I've got some videos to review and there's a bunch of things that are on YouTube and it's been a great learning experience being able to see ProgJect from the audience side. And I've got some ideas for retooling it for the next time that we go out so that Michael is doing more, because Michael's a keyboard player as well as a bit of bass and everything. And yeah, he's got too much time off, as was the way I put it last week. And his answer to that was great, because I'm only doing that because that's the way you arranged everything. But if I can do some more, please. So yeah, we're going to retool it a bit and not going to take away any of the instrumental, but make more use of him as a tool.
When Keneally and I had this trio with Doug Lunn, the bass player, late great
sure.
bass player.
We did his tribute at my facility out here when he passed away.
Yes, and God, we miss him. We did the Barbarian, that trio with Mike playing organ, and yeah, you can definitely call on him for some keyboard parts. He knows all the Gentle Giant keyboard parts.
Yes, he does. Yeah. We've actually talked about some dueling keyboard things in the future too. Yeah, he's a beast. It's funny, just to comment on the medleys, because I appreciate the fact that you like them. They went down so well, which I was really excited for, because there were some people on the outside that said, oh, you're not going to go, people don't want medleys, they're going to hear roundabout and then you're going to go into something else, they're going to want to hear the rest of roundabout. No, it's just the opposite. But I love Pro Tools because I do a lot of production and engineering, and I really love the tool of Pro Tools of fixing things and moving things around. I can edit anything that's wrong. I can fix it. I can take a drum set falling down the stairs and make it sound like a drum solo. I love that shit. So when it came time to editing, especially the crazy medleys, Bruford and Rush, it was so cool to be able to put things together that usually go from segment to segment with some type of an identifiable metric modulation. And if you're not playing with guys that get that, you can't do it. And so, when I put together the Bruford medley, which was Hell's Bells, into the Abington Chasp, which even the Bruford band never played live, into Age of Information, Sahara of Snow, and Land's End, or whatever the order is, I had it in my head. I sang the parts in my head, so I knew timing-wise, tempo-wise, and time signature-wise how it was going to work. So when I got it into Pro Tools and I was able to move the things around and have them so seamless like that, and the same thing with the Rush medley, it's such a blast to play that live because, the audience really digs it and we love playing it, and it just keeps it so interesting and so much fun. I'm glad you mentioned it because I'm proud of them and I really do enjoy doing them. And I just put together a pretty insane Lamb medley for the next tour, because everybody loves the Lamb. Yep. And, it's not that it wasn't on the list for any reason other than those other three were there first, but I just put together a great Lamb medley and we'll start working on that soon. And the same thing, one time signature into another with a drum fill and boom, it's perfect. Yeah.
That's so much fun, Jonathan. Yeah, it's interesting how it's also kind of associative too, right? It's like this goes with that, goes with this, and you think of them all being sort of parts of the same fabric.
Right. Yeah. And they are. They absolutely are when you come from the rhythmic aspect of it that I'm coming from, it
Mhm.
is all the same fabric. Even though they're different records and different keys and different time signatures and everything, there is that common denominator rhythmically that we can put something together that everybody else can make work. And I love that. Yeah.
And for super fans out there, I know that you're going to want me to mention that Land's End by Bruford is a Dave Stewart composition, which originally appeared as the Bryden two-step for amphibians on the National Health
Part
album of Cues and Chords.
part two, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Jonathan, you're one-upping me there. Yes, but you got to
Accusing
think, who are
George.
we talking to? You
Right,
know?
right, right. No. That's a. I love the song "Binoculars" on that record too. All right, that's of Q's and Cures. Yeah, I
Yes.
was a big National Health fan. I was very lucky to have met Pip Pyle a couple of times,
Nice.
and I saw National Health live. They played a little tiny theater in Boston when I was about 14 years old, and I skipped school and took the train from Salem, Massachusetts into Boston to see them. And they were amazing. The four-piece band with Alan and Dave, and they had a crazy avant-garde French band to open up for them. And I forget the French name, but it translated into Mad Shit the White Wolf. Yeah, and National Health, a double bill with them, and National Health was amazing. They were absolutely incredible.
Wow.
Yeah.
My hat's off to you. You say you saw National Health live. I did not get that opportunity.
Yeah, I was just one of those things lucky. And I saw Gentle Giant twice too.
I,
Amazing.
I saw Civilian, which, as
Yep.
fans will know, is now coming out in a new reissue. And I'm going to have Derek Schulman and John Weathers on the show to talk about
Oh,
that.
Ray, tell please. I mean, Derek Schulman came out to see us play at the Iridium in New York,
Yes.
along with Eddie Jobson. We were gaga over that. Meeting Derek was amazing.
Yeah.
Please tell John Weathers I said hello. I interviewed him for the magazine years ago. I jumped on a train from London, like 4 hours out to the Welsh countryside, and he picked me up and we spent the whole day together, and it was just amazing. What a lovely guy. And he, along with that band, I think is the most underrated prog band in the history of music.
It just
Man,
fell out that way. I mean, it's getting
they were
better.
too good. They were too
Yeah,
good.
I think they were. They were probably a little too sophisticated for the
Yep.
time, but it doesn't matter because now 40 years later, 50 years later, really, it's the 50th anniversary of Octopus right now.
Right.
So
Amazing.
think about that. 50
Yeah,
years ago, Octopus.
I
And these
know.
guys are still with us, and we can give them our love and tell them how much we admire and appreciate what they've done. It's still resonating.
Yeah. It's amazing when you do look at the dates of when some things were done. And like you go right back to um, in the Court of the Crimson King and in the Wake of Poseidon, the year that they were doing that, and look at the other prog bands at the same time. I mean, Crimson and Prip were really ahead of their time and breaking a lot of ground. The others caught up, or maybe they didn't, because when you look at what the quartet did with Bill and Tony and Adrian, they were way ahead of their time again.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, when you look, and the same thing with Gentle Giant, those early records, they had it from day one. And some of the stuff that they were doing back then is just, it's still not being done today. The vocal chorales and arias that they were doing. And I mean, when I saw them live, and you did too, because I saw Civilian and the Missing Piece tour, I believe those two, they had the 5-drummer drum solo. They had the 4 vocalists doing their thing on many songs. They were all playing recorders. They were all playing tuned percussion. I mean, unbelievable. Who does that? I'm just incredible.
I always say to my students, that's when the stage show was the musicianship.
Yeah, yeah. And it was the whole band. It was everybody. I mean, the talent, just incredible. And Weathers was no slouch. I mean, the man handled odd time like he was driving a Ferrari, through Monaco. Yeah,
He
just
knew when
incredible.
to lay out. I mean, I was just talking, I don't mind telling people, I was just talking to Dennis Chambers about Gentle Giant
Yeah,
this
he's a big
morning.
prog fan. Yeah.
Yeah, big prog fan, and the idea that their time was so good that Weathers could actually lay out no hi-hat foot, no
Right.
hi-hat quarter note, and
Yeah.
they're just putting all the different contrapuntal lines together,
Yeah.
and just like
Amazing.
water,
Right.
just like
Right.
natural. And so
Yeah.
they'll always have my admiration for just being able to make it sound easy. When you hear a band playing complicated stuff and it sounds effortless,
Yeah.
and you don't realize really how
Mhm.
hard it is until you try to play Battle of
Yeah.
Epping Forest, or you
Yeah.
try to play Riding the Scree.
Yeah.
You don't know until you try to play it what's involved in making it flow and sound easy. And I think that's our challenge, really. The drummers that we followed, Alan White, by the way, rest in peace.
Yeah. Yeah. Very sad.
Tremendous impact on how progressive rhythm sections worked.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. I remember saying this to Bill Bruford one day that, he and Chris Squire, thank God they weren't the rhythm section that everybody thought you were supposed to do. Meaning, Bill Bruford would have had the fastest single kick in the world, or Chris Squire wouldn't have played most of the lines he played. They were so opposite and counter to each other, which was amazing. Whereas I think Alan was much more of the same type of rhythm section player with Chris, which was great in their own way. But Bill and Chris were a very different rhythm section than Alan. And my favorite yes is more of the Bill yes, even right down to like Time in a Word. His playing is just stupendous. He's amazing. But Alan was the better drummer for yes, in my opinion, because he went and gave them the, that bedrock to do that type of music, where Bruford was much more fragmented and too clever for them, if you know what I mean. Not to say that the other guys in yes weren't clever, but Bill. I mean, I know you know what I mean. Yeah, Alan was definitely the right guy for yes, and thank God, because where would we be without the Relaya record, and Drama has some amazing stuff on it. Yeah, I
Alan
mean,
White brings
good
it.
stuff.
He
Yeah,
brings it
very
into
sad.
Owner. He brings it into great. Big Generator. Hearing him
Mhm.
in a stadium rock setting, as I did when Big Generator toured.
Right.
I couldn't believe it was sort of this lean version of Bonham, in a way.
Yeah.
You know,
Right. Yep. No, he was a great player. Yeah, it's you were talking before about this music not really being played by those players anymore. On the flip side, I have to be honest, the last like 3 or 4 times I saw yes was really sad and disappointing. I walked out a couple times because they just couldn't play the stuff anymore,
and
and
I'm okay with that. You know what I mean, Jonathan? I talk with this about about this with my friends, and we all say they don't owe us a thing. They don't
mhm,
have to go out. They don't have to go and prove that they can do it anymore. They don't have to play it at slower tempos. I agree with you 100%.
yeah,
And that's sort of where we're between a rock and a hard place, because people think like, oh, you're just doing covers.
right,
Well, no, we're really celebrating this incredible music and way of thinking of music and way of organizing music and a way of bringing different types of music together into one
mhm,
thing.
right,
That's what
yes,
those bands did.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a melting pot of music. Yeah,
Very much
yeah.
so.
I mean, it's no, it's like to me, I feel the same way, not to as large a content degree, but the same way about fusion, because with exception to fusion not having vocals and being more of a usually a jazz structure with more soloing, I mean, what could be more fun for a drummer than playing prog rock or fusion?
Right.
I mean, it's the greatest stuff, in my opinion, equal to, you know, being able to play drums for like Aretha Franklin, which I got to, or James Brown or something, where you can just sit back and kick, snare, and hat take you to the moon. That's equally fun in a different way. But prog and fusion is just awesome. I mean, yeah, I'm sure we grew up listening to all the same stuff,
All the same
and
stuff.
how fun to be able to play, this type of music that doesn't incorporate every style from reggae, which Genesis and Zappa did a bit of the reggae stuff. And of course, Crazy Odd Time and swing and funk and fatback. It's all there. It's so cool. Yeah.
And your experience is similar to mine in that it was a training ground. It
Mm-hmm.
was a music school. It was, what is seven? Well, how do you play in seven?
Yep.
How do
Yeah. I
you
mean,
play, how do you play 19?
yeah. And for me, and maybe for you too, I learned all that by ear first. And by ear meaning, melody and song arrangement and structure. And I think that's, for me, it was the better way because I was playing Keep It Greasy in 1916, and we were playing Apocalypse in 9/8, and we were playing Crazy Jethro Tull, the Pine Martin's Jig and all of this crazy stuff with Mark Craney and Mahavishnu, of course. Those first two records, Birds of Fire and In a Mounting Flame, man, they were my Bibles for a while. Was it Extraterrestrial Celestial Travelers?
Terrestrial commuters, yeah,
Yeah,
1916.
1916 also. But it was when I went to Chafee who pointed out, this is what time signatures you're playing in. These are the subdivisions. You can flip it. You can do this. And then my vocabulary really expanded, and my understanding of it, came into play. So then I could manipulate it and go from there. Whereas, and I've said this before, I don't do a lot of teaching, but I think one of the biggest injustices and disservices that most drum teachers teach a student is, this is 2/4 and 4/4, and then we'll do a little bit of 3/4 and some 6/8, and that's the stuff you need to know. We'll try a little 7, but it's scary because no, it's not. There's no difference. It's here's the beginning of a measure, here's the end of a measure. Whatever you throw in there is broken up into this. And
Yeah, but dude, our people are from the East. I grew up
yeah,
I grew up with Turkish and Armenian 7/8
right.
and 78s. It's like when I was ready, I didn't know it.
Yeah, right.
Or you know what I mean? And you think
Mhm.
of the concept of clave, and you think of the concept of what that movement is for seven, and 3+4, or 4+3, and all the ways of adding these things up.
Right.
And but I think it's interesting that you probably did have more of a propensity for that, or a kind of innate ability to deal with that. But also the ears are I think, a better teacher than the eyes.
Oh, they absolutely are. There's no doubt about it. And when you do grow up listening to the music we're talking about, man, you're learning everything.
Yeah.
Then, most of my career is a last minute call to help somebody. Whether it's Alice Cooper's got a drummer with a bad neck, or a drummer that, quit before the tour, or it's Aretha Franklin, which began as a sight reading gig,
Mm.
or Satriani thrown together, Fuel when they're in the studio, the drummer can't play. I had to, that type of stuff. And everybody says, "Oh man, it sounds like you were in the band for 10 years. How'd you learn all that stuff so quickly?" The roadmap is really an easy roadmap when you've driven, like I said before, when you've driven the Grand Prix in Monaco. It's really easy to drive down the street to the local market.
Yeah.
And so when you grow up playing all the prog and fusion we're talking about, and understanding that and eating it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's so simple to play, modern music. You've heard it all before. You get used to key changes, you get used to codas, and you get used to the way phrasing is happening, because when you've heard the most difficult stuff, the easy stuff 99% of the time is going to do what you think it's going to do. What a cadence is. You might not know what a cadence is, but you've heard it and played it in so many different ways with so many different other artists that your ear recognizes where it's going to go. And
Yeah.
I'm very lucky and grateful that I did grow up playing and listening to the crazy stuff that I did before, the pop stuff. Even though it's funny, somebody asked me recently, what your first records and influences were. And I've always said kind of the same thing. Well, it was Carnival 9 and the Brain Salad Surgery record because of the cover. I heard Lucky Man and I was interested in ELP, but instead of getting the first record, I saw the cover of Brain Salad and asked my parents for that, and early Crimson, and of course, Yes and everything. But I recently went and I looked at my record collection because I've got like 5,000 or 6,000 LPs still. And my Beatles was there early on, but the first record my parents ever bought me, I was 6 years old, and they got me The Point by Harry Nilsson.
Yeah, Me and My Arrow.
Yes, and that cartoon movie with the music that I saw on TV when I was in first grade was what got me into music. And then I was looking at some of the other early records I had, Harry Chapin,
Yeah.
Gordon Lightfoot. So I was really listening to the storytelling before I was actually getting into the instruments and the musicality of it.
Yeah.
And then, it was hearing Lucky Man. And actually for me, it was my older brother had Iron Butterflies in a In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida record. When I heard that song and on that record with that drum solo, which is a melodic drum solo, that, Ron Bushy, one of the greatest drum solos ever, because like a Neil Peart solo and like Chester and Phil together, it's a composed drum solo that you can melodically follow along and sing, and you know what's going to happen, which is very different from a Buddy Rich or a Simon or a Vinny that are just, awesome and display of chops and speed and everything, but it's not a composition per se. And so when I heard In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida at whatever I was, 8 years old, 10 years old, I wanted to be a drummer. My parents signed me up for a drum set or to play drums in elementary school. And the first day I found myself standing up at a snare drum with like 2B, baseball bat size drumsticks, playing in a kids orchestra with 30 other kids that played their instruments as poorly as I played drums. And after a few weeks of trying to learn a Sousa march, I just gave it up. And then it came back around to me when I heard Lucky Man on the radio and I heard the Moog solo. I wanted to investigate keyboards. Mm-hmm. My parents took me to the shopping center, to the record store. And when I saw the cover of Brain Salad, I wanted that record. When I listened to Brain Salad and I got to Carnival 9, especially the third impression, because once again, that storytelling about the computer that takes over mankind and everything, yes. I was just mesmerized. And of course, I heard Toccata, which has a drum solo that incorporates Moog drums and synthesizers.
And timpani.
Oh, yeah. And the bells and the gong. That was it. I was right back to drums a couple of years later. So that's how it happened for me.
And I love that you incorporate chimes, crotales, and tune percussion in ProgJect. And I'm one of those people that, I hate, the comedian Todd Barry, he has a funny joke. He says, you know how your band sucks? Your drummer has a gong.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, no, it's the opposite. Yeah. All drummers should have gongs.
In the beginning, when we were talking about this, and I was basically saying, I'm going to play a drum kit that incorporates Phil and Bill and Neil and Carl and whoever else authentically. Mm-hmm. And Rio said, I want the same with keyboards. I want a real mini Moog and an Art Pro soloist and a Jupiter and whatever, because the people that we were getting, I don't want to say advice from, but input, helping us out with putting it together and booking the tour, and we're kept on saying, move it, just play a pad, keyboard, you can switch programs, Rio, you don't need 6 keyboards, you can do it on 2, and blah blah blah. And we kept on fighting back, and when it came time to budget the tour, and I really did look at the difference of what's it going to cost to schlep a set of tubular bells and a gong and a rack and 6 keyboards instead of 2 or 3, I just said, fuck it. This is what we want to do. And if it costs a little bit more money, it costs a little bit more money. But this is the reason why when I was 14 and 13 and 15, Phil and Carl and Neil blew me away. I want to do it, and I mean, it's funny because there's even more that we have that we didn't take out. We did, pare it down a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it was just, it's so much fun being able to play this music, but also play it authentically the way that the original guys played it and intended it for it to be heard. And speaking about Neil, I saw Rush many, many times. And as he evolved in the band, he devolved drum kit wise. He went from double bass, many toms, concert toms, to single bass with just a couple of double-headed racks. And then he got rid of all of the tuned percussion, and he got, the cat, mallet cat or whatever it was. And I get it, but I didn't prefer it. I really didn't.
You get a kick out of this. When we did Trick of the Tail tour with the musical box, they built me I played Bruford's part.
So there were two drummers.
Yeah, that's
okay.
So they had the Phil drummer and I was the Bruford drummer. And they built me the Bruford percussion rack.
Oh, cool.
From Crimson that he moved over into Trick of the Tail with the two rototoms, the wood blocks, the hanging gongs, the chime plates, the whole thing. What a thrill that was to be able to, this is why he has these. And then the cymbal tree. I mean, it was like
the Peisty rack that was accentuated, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
The only thing we didn't have, and this is for the geeks out there, we couldn't duplicate the bent ride cymbal that was his Red Nightmare China sound.
Right.
So I had to substitute it. It had to be a China, but that cymbal was what we call an idiophone, which means it only sounds like itself.
Right. Oh, very cool. That must have been so much fun.
Oh my God, it was so much fun. And then of course, you worry about the tuning of the drums and which are the right, and the glockenspiel and what are the right parts. And so, you fall in love all over again.
Definitely. Yep. Yeah. It's great. I mean, at this age and with everything I've done and with the world that has changed, I'm really happy that this has come around now because, I say this just out of honesty. In the last 10 to 15 years, I probably, in let's just say out of the, 50 or 60 records that I've done, or 100, because there are plenty that don't even get released anymore, I'm lucky if there were 2 or 3 that were great musical experiences. Now that everybody's a musician at home and a producer engineer with Pro Tools and a laptop, there's so much crap to play on, but it's crap. And I started turning sessions down because they would send me a demo and either the music sucked or they didn't know what they were doing. I would say to somebody, well, send me the demo, is it to a click? Is it, to a drum machine, or is it a drummer? And I'd get records from people saying, oh no, it's all to a click. It's all, on a grid and everything. And I'd open up the session and, here's the grid with a cowbell and the bass note, quarter note is here, and the rhythm guitar note that's supposed to be in the same place and they don't hear this. And when I first started coming across this, I started fixing people's records before I would even play on them. And half the time they couldn't even tell the difference, which is so sad. And half the time they could. And sometimes they paid me for it, sometimes they didn't. But I got less and less interested in what I had done for half of my career, which was farmed out drum tracks and played on a bunch of different records for a bunch of different people. And the experiences were just becoming very emotionally deflating. And why do it? I don't need to play drums for a paycheck. I get a paycheck from it, but I have other businesses in music that make money. So yeah, I stopped doing a lot of sessions. And that was one of the nice things about the musical box. I absolutely thank them from the bottom of my heart for calling me and giving me that experience, because I was 15 years old again. And I'm 15 right now talking to you, especially you, because we're on the same wavelength here. I'm in case you didn't see it when you saw us play both gigs, I'm in heaven. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
and
very
the audience is in heaven. I mean, the Florida show right before Cruise to the Edge, that was like, I guess, like shooting fish in a barrel, but it was sort of like, that's the audience.
yeah.
And they got every note and they knew and they waited for the guitar solo and they waited for the keyboard solo and they waited for that drum fill.
Yeah.
And they all knew it. And you could see everyone air drumming the way you would at a Rush concert. And, it's the music of our
Yeah.
lifetime. I mean, we're old as
Yeah.
shit, but we saw the best bands.
Yeah, we did. And it's in a really, you just said something that's really great. It could be taken in a bad way, but it's a positive. It is like shooting fish in a barrel. And what's so interesting about this gig is you're right. Everybody's showing up not only to hear this music played, but to see you play it the way we're playing it. And again, as a very blessed freelancer who's played with, a bunch of different artists, there aren't that many gigs, even sometimes the big gigs that I've played, that the audience is so into what the artist, whether it's a single artist or the whole band, is doing, and it is really great to play a gig like this where everybody in the audience really is connecting with you and you're connecting with them and I'm connecting with the guys on the stage, and it really is a global thing every night that we play, and can't wait to do it again. We're all jonesing. The first tour, it was a month, but it went so quickly, and we're all fired up to do it again.
Well, I can't say enough good things about ProgJect, but tell people that are listening what's the future of the band.
We're all committed to doing this. We're all up there in age, but everybody has seriously, jokingly said we all want to look at a decade of touring every year. We've all pretty much said that we will make this the priority gig, but still do other gigs around it. So, Keneally's still going to play with the Zappa band and do Beer for Dolphins and anything else. Michael is still going to do, shows with Saga. I think Rio's got something with Spock's Beard late next year as a little post-COVID, reunion tour or whatever. So, but we all want this to be the main gig. And
Wow.
we've all committed to each other that we want to at least book 6 months a year, every year touring. And that's global, the US and Canada. The only limitations we had this year right now with COVID. We're going to go out again in the fall and play other places around the country that we've not played yet. Probably double on a couple that we did play because the audiences were so great. And then we'll do a West Coast run in December. But then next year, we're already fielding offers to go international for the UK and Europe and Asia. We have a South American, Central American promoter asking us to come down and do Costa Rica, Panama, Venezuela, and stuff like that. So we want to play. And I'm happy to say that everybody's as fired up over it as I am too. I mean, it's funny, I know the fire that was lit with me again. And I wanted to, and I hoped that the others would feel the same way, but I didn't necessarily expect them all to, and everybody does. I mean, Keneally was the last one to come in on the gig, but when Mike's done some interviews and I've listened to him or we've spoken, he said, this is the stuff I grew up on. And, getting to play Siberian Khatru, Steve's part in 7 and back and forth between 8th notes and 16th notes is I'm living my dream as a kid again. And so everybody's really on the same page, and just super excited. So the future is what we want to do, every year. Like I said, at least 6 months out of the year. And with a new set, just like the musical box, and everybody does new tunes, we're going to be doing the same. And I think we're going to still focus on those main 4 bands, but change up the material a little bit. But then branch out with some other Gentle Giant and some other UK. We've talked about doing some Utopia. Maybe a little bit of Brand X, and just have a nice repertoire that will have the main framework every night, and then probably another, half dozen to 10 tunes that we'll swap in and out and play at different times so we can put on a different show. in places where we are lucky enough to play multiple nights, it'll be a different set, and there'll be more for people to see.
Jonathan, what a pleasure to talk with you today.
No, same here. This was exciting, and like I said, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to say hi at the gigs. We will next time. But I was very excited that you came out, and appreciative of you coming out and your kind words, because like I said, you're a beast. And when I saw you with the Mahavishnu Project, which could be 20 years ago, I saw you in the early 2000s. I was in the audience, just watching you live the dream and riding along with you. So my hat's off to you as a player and a musician, and for doing this too, keeping it alive like we're all trying to do.
I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
So, Jonathan, what's your social media? How can people find you online?
I don't have a website anymore because the company HostGator that was hosting it had subbed out my URL to another company. So when it came time to pay, it went into my spam folder. So I think if you go on jonathanmover.com, it's some Filipino sex site now. It has nothing to do with me. So I gave up on having a website because I wasn't going to spend $10,000 to get my name back. But I'm not hugely active on social media. Like, I don't get on Facebook every day and do what most people do. But you can find me on Facebook. Of course, ProgJect is on Facebook and Instagram. The ProgJect website, you can email through mover@progJect.com, ProgJect. The more you say it, the easier it is, ProgJect. My company out here is Champion Sight and Sound. You can always get me at mover@champion.biz, Drumhead Magazine, mover@drumheadmag.com. So you can find me. In this day and age, it's pretty impossible not to find somebody. Yeah, so that's where it's at.
Thanks again.
And I welcome the contact. I love, communicating and conversing with people about music and drums and all of this stuff. So feel free to reach out, and I look forward to it.
And that's what we do here every couple of weeks. And I'm so glad that my guest has been Jonathan Mover. He's making things happen in music and keeping it alive, as we try to do here every time. So thank you, Jonathan.
My pleasure. Thank
Everybody,
you as well.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the ProgCast, and we'll see you next time.